Franklin Delano Roosevelt was our longest-serving president. He expanded the federal government to heights unknown previously and led the Democrats to be dominant for the next 20 years. He was born on January 30th, 1882, in Hyde Park, New York. His family was extremely prominent in that state. He was basically homeschooled and was able to speak both German and French, probably due to his numerous trips to Europe with his parents. He even attended school for 1 year in Germany when he was 9. He went to Harvard College and then Columbia Law School. He passed the New York bar in 1907. He married Eleanor Roosevelt in 1905. She was a niece of Theodore Roosevelt, who was a fifth cousin of FDR. They moved into his home in Hyde Park, New York, called Springwood. They had 6 children, but one would die in infancy. Eleanor left the child raising to caregivers because she stated that she knew nothing about handling or feeding babies. Unfortunately for Eleanor, FDR would basically sleep with anything that moved, but he had a particularly long affair with Lucy Mercer, his secretary. Eleanor knew of the affairs and never forgave him. From 1918, their relationship was basically a political alliance rather than an actual marriage. FDR cared little for the practice of law and ran for the New York State Senate. After winning the election, he concentrated on trying to end the machine corruption that plagued New York politics. FDR supported Wilson over his cousin, Theodore Roosevelt, for the presidency. It didn't bother Teddy, but it did bother some FDR's family members. For his support, Wilson appointed him to be the Assistant Secretary of the Navy. FDR tried to run for the Senate in 1914, but lost. As the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, he concentrated on expanding civilian control of the Navy. He gained valuable experience, which was probably very useful during World War I and World War II. When World War I broke out, FDR wanted to be appointed as a naval officer, but Wilson wanted him to remain at his position. FDR actively sought the vice presidential nomination in 1920, and he got it. However, he and the presidential nominee, James M. Cox of Ohio, were defeated. He returned to the practice of law and planned his political career. It was then, in 1921, where he was diagnosed with polio and became permanently disabled. He established a foundation and a rehabilitation center for the disease. With the encouragement of his wife, Eleanor, he refused to give up on his political career. In 1928, he ran for the governor of New York, which he won by 1%. It was in New York when he started to have his fireside chats to pressure the legislature to pass his policies. In 1929, when the Great Depression began, he was the first governor to advocate unemployment insurance. When FDR ran for re-election as the governor of New York, he won by 14%. He advocated for full employment, unemployment insurance, pensions, reforestation, and he continued to work to try to end the corruption within New York. In 1932, he won his party's nomination for the presidency. He ran on a host of social programs to deal with the Depression. He also wanted to end prohibition. His running mate was John Nance Gardner, the Speaker of the House from Texas. He faced the incumbent president, Herbert Hoover, and Charles Curtis, the Senate Majority Leader from Kansas. Roosevelt won by a landslide. He received 472 electoral votes, won 42 states, and received 57.4% of the popular vote. Hoover only won 59 electoral votes, only won 6 states, and got 39.6% of the popular vote. FDR won by over 7 million votes. During the transition, an assassin tried to kill FDR, but before the assassin could fire, a woman hit the assassin with her purse, and the assassin ended up shooting the mayor of Chicago. One of the first things FDR did when he got into office was to close the banks to stop the run on the banks that was happening. He also lifted many of the prohibition restrictions. He began a slew of government agencies and work projects to deal with the Depression, including the introduction of Social Security. In the election of 1836, he trounced the Republicans, carrying every state except Maine and Vermont. He was having trouble getting some of his policies through judicial review and was threatening to pack the court. One of the justices, however, started to side with him, and he began to win more and more. He got more and more of his policies through. Later, he was able to appoint several Supreme Court justices himself. His uncontrolled spending did help the unemployment rate go down, and it helped with economic growth. However, he could not get the unemployment down below 12%. It took World War II to accomplish that. In 1938, FDR saw the rise of Germany and the annexation of Czechoslovakia, and he quietly began to prepare for war. The mood of the country was isolationist, but particularly after France was defeated, the mood slowly started to change. And we openly began to build our military, and we also introduced conscription. Our military went from 189,000 people in 1939 to over 1.4 million in 1941. The election of 1940 was non-competitive, with FDR receiving 55% of the popular vote. He won 38 of the 48 states, and the electoral vote was a wipeout. He won 85% of the Electoral College. FDR began to slowly give aid to Europe, but he was still hesitant to directly get involved. The mood of anti-war was still sort of high in America. That bridge was crossed, however, on December 7th, 1941, when the Empire of Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. Once the U.S. got involved, it was impossible for Germany to win. For example, we produced more aircraft than Germany, the Soviet Union, Japan, and Britain combined. The resources, particularly oil, was simply not there for Germany. Of course, America drastically helped them win that war at a cost of almost 400,000 plus people. Keep in mind, however, the absolute devastation of other countries. Their cities lay in ruin. The USSR had between 20 and 30 million dead, maybe no more, nobody knows. The UK lost almost as many people, but only had a third of our population. China lost 15 million, and their cities were devastated. India lost 3 million. I am 100% not diminishing America's sacrifice during that war. But at least when our soldiers came home, they came home to cities that were still standing. There was food, there was electricity, and all the conveniences of America. And let me be clear, I hate communism, but the Soviet Union won that war and suffered more than any groups outside of course, probably the Jews. After the war, education in this country expanded due to the GI Bill. FDR's health began to decline, and he thought about resigning after the war. The election of 1944 was another easy win, even though the popular vote was a little closer. But he won 432 out of the 531 electoral votes. I wonder if he lived, how many elections would he have kept winning? And of course, you can't talk about FDR without talking about the Japanese internments during the war. But Germans and Italians were also sent to concentration camps. But they usually weren't solely just for their racial makeup. While at his little White House in Warm Springs, Georgia, he passed away on April 12th, 1945. At the height of his wealth, he was worth about $80 million due to his large family inheritance. If you like these presidential videos, please hit the like button and subscribe. Thanks for listening.